More than a century after the Titanic sank, a new wave of claims suggests something shocking. Some reports say the body of the ship's captain may have finally been found after 114 years. At first, that idea sounds possible. The Titanic lies nearly 3,800 meters deep in the North Atlantic, in a cold, dark environment where temperatures stay around 1 to 2 degrees C. These conditions slow down decomposition and have preserved parts of the ship for decades. So naturally, people wonder whether anything else could still remain there. But when scientists look at the evidence, the story becomes far less straightforward. Captain Edward Smith, who commanded the Titanic during its maiden voyage in April 1912, went down with the ship. His body was never officially recovered. In the weeks after the disaster, recovery ships found over 300 bodies, but more than 1,000 victims were never located. So where do these new claims come from? Much of the confusion is tied to what researchers have actually discovered at the wreck site. Since the Titanic was found in 1985, multiple expeditions have mapped the area in detail. The wreck is split into two main sections, lying about 600 meters apart, surrounded by a debris field that stretches across several square kilometers. Within that debris field, scientists have documented more than 5,000 artifacts, including clothing, shoes, personal belongings, and items used by the crew. But here is the key fact. No intact human bodies have ever been found at the Titanic wreck. The reason comes down to biology and deep-sea chemistry. While cold temperatures slow decay, they do not stop it. Over time, microorganisms and chemical processes break down soft tissue completely. At extreme depths, even bone can eventually dissolve, especially in areas where certain compounds in seawater reduce its stability. What researchers have found instead are indirect traces. In several parts of the debris field, pairs of shoes have been discovered lying close together on the ocean floor. These are widely believed to mark the locations where bodies once came to rest. As the bodies decomposed, only durable materials like leather soles remained. This detail is often misunderstood and sometimes exaggerated into claims that human remains were found. Another source of confusion comes from recovered artifacts linked to crew members. Some expeditions have located uniform buttons, navigation tools, and personal items that may have belonged to officers. However, none of these objects have been definitively connected to Captain Smith himself. There are also conflicting historical accounts of his final moments. Some survivors reported that he stayed on the bridge as the ship went down. Others claimed they saw him in the water shortly before the sinking. These accounts cannot all be verified, and they leave uncertainty about where his body might have ended up. Ocean conditions make this even more complex. When the Titanic broke apart, debris and bodies were scattered over a wide area. Currents in the North Atlantic could have carried remains far from the wreck site before they sank. Many of the bodies recovered in 1912 were found at the surface days later, not near the final resting place of the ship. Modern expeditions use remotely operated vehicles, sonar mapping, and high-resolution imaging to study the wreck in detail. These surveys have repeatedly confirmed the same conclusion. There is no evidence that the captain's body has ever been found. And from a scientific standpoint, it is extremely unlikely that it ever will be. The Titanic site continues to provide valuable information about the disaster, from how the ship broke apart to how deep-sea environments affect materials over time. But when it comes to the people on board, the ocean has erased most physical traces. There is no verified proof that Captain Smith's body was ever found. And that uncertainty may be the most honest ending. When disasters end without answers, the questions become part of the tragedy. Some men disappear into history. Others disappear with it. Whether his body was found or not, Captain Smith never left the Titanic. Do you think some mysteries are better left unanswered? Tell what you think.
exclusive photographs, by far the best yet, are in from the Titanic. For most of this century, that
When the first images of the Titanic shipwreck appeared in September 1985, the world stopped. People were glued to their TVs, watching the legendary ship reappear after more than 70 years. Where did the Titanic sink, you ask? It's located about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. This so-called unsinkable ship rests in complete darkness, about 12,600 feet below the surface. Yep, that's how deep the Titanic is. But even after such a long fall down to the ocean floor, the front part, known as the bow, still looks surprisingly intact. I mean, the railings were still there, the anchor chains too, even the elegant curves of the hull you might recognize from old photos. But the news barely mentioned the stern back then, and there's a reason we still don't talk much about it. You see, these images were about more than just capturing mesmerizing and eerie footage. They were proof of what really happened when the Titanic sank. We were finally getting some answers about this 1912 disaster, when more than 1,600 people lost their lives. And before you Google how many people survived the Titanic, I'll tell you, 706. Among those survivors, several claimed they saw the ship break apart as it went down. Others insisted it sank in one piece, and in the end, investigators agreed with them. Back then, official reports concluded that Titanic had gone down intact. So, for 73 years, that was the official story, until we finally saw the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. When the Titanic underwater photos were released, they confirmed it. Yes, the liner really did break apart as it sank. And if we've just seen those images of the bow, that means the stern must be around there too, right? Well, kind of. I mean, we did find it. It's located about 2,000 feet away from the bow, lying on the ocean floor. So yes, it exists. But why doesn't anyone ever talk about what happened to the stern of the Titanic? Well, there's a big reason for that. See, the bow, even after all the damage from hitting the seafloor, still looks recognizable. Many of its interiors are surprisingly well preserved, and it's lying as if the ship was continuing its voyage. But the stern is destroyed. Today it's more like a twisted tangle of steel that barely looks like a ship at all. Only the parts that are more resilient, like the propellers, reciprocating engines, and rudder, have managed to hold their shape. But the rest of the stern section is melting into the seafloor. Yet, to understand why it's in such a terrible state, we need to go back to that freezing night of April 15, 1912, the night of the Titanic wreck. Just hours before the tragedy, Titanic was still sailing smoothly across the cold North Atlantic. The stern was alive with people, families talking, music playing, life going on as usual. This is where the room for passengers with the cheapest tickets were located. That's why third-class travelers were also known as steerage passengers. But the stern wasn't only for passengers. It also contained many of the ship's storage areas, including cargo holds, baggage rooms, kitchens, crew quarters, and even the engineering spaces. And hold on to that info, it's going to be important in a second. So let's jump straight to when the liner struck the iceberg. As the bow began to sink, the stern slowly lifted out of the water, putting enormous strain on the middle of the ship. By around 2 in the morning, the lights on Titanic flickered and then went out. Moments later, the ship broke in two, and the bow disappeared beneath the waves. The stern briefly settled back on the water before rising again, this time almost vertical. It stayed upright for a few seconds and then began its final plunge. At about 2:20 in the morning, the stern vanished beneath the Atlantic. Titanic was gone. What was happening beneath the water were two completely different scenarios. First, the bow slowly filled with water and began to drift downward, almost sailing gently like a submarine. Because of that, it managed to keep its shape and stayed mostly intact. But Titanic's stern collapse was a whole different story. The stern was ripped wide open where the ship had split apart. Water rushed in through that open end at incredible speed. This sudden flooding made the stern plunge downward much faster than the bow. The rush of water created so much turbulence that pieces were ripped off and scattered all around the ocean floor. Now, remember what I said earlier about the spaces inside the stern? Those huge storage areas were wide open, and many of them contained air pockets. So when the stern section broke away, it still had compartments filled with trapped air. As it spun down into the depths, this increasing water pressure crushed those pockets one by one. The surrounding structure began to implode, scattering pieces of metal, furniture, statues, and passengers' belongings across the ocean floor. So many experts believe the immense water pressure made that section collapse as it sank, and that's why we can't see much of it today. And now you know the answer to the Titanic back section mystery. We don't talk about it much, simply because there's not much left to see. It's like the part of the Titanic story that's too broken or too painful to talk about openly. The side of the ship that truly feels lost. And sorry to say this, but that's the future of the bow, too. I mean, it won't be there forever. The iconic shape of the wreck is changing year after year, and not in a good way. The front part of the Titanic is deteriorating, and one day it'll be entirely gone. Down on the seabed, the Titanic faces enormous pressure, nearly 390 times greater than at the surface. The good news is there aren't any air pockets left inside the ship, so big implosions won't happen again. But the bad news is that the ship's own weight is now helping to tear it apart. As those 52,000 tons of steel slowly settle into the ocean floor, they twist and pull on the hull. Submersible missions have already spotted large cracks running through the steel plates, and even the decks themselves are starting to cave in. And there's something else. The wreck might look cool and spooky today, but that actually comes from a thick layer of bacteria and microbes covering it. The problem is, they're slowly eating the Titanic. Yep, most of the corrosion happening down there is caused by bacteria, and this is gradually weakening the entire structure. Steel plates, beams, and supports are getting thinner every year. Scientists estimate that the ship is losing between 0.13 and 0.2 tons of iron every single day. Still, even at that rate, the wreck won't vanish overnight. Experts believe it could take up to 420 years for the liner to disappear completely. Until then, we'll keep watching this sad but natural process unfold. Parts of the ship have been falling apart little by little since the night when Titanic sank, and a lot has already changed since we started taking underwater photos, like the railing sections that have dropped and the ceiling in the captain's bathroom that's collapsed. That's why so many expeditions are now focused on capturing footage and detailed scans of the Titanic shipwreck, to preserve its memory before the ocean takes it all. It's our way of keeping the story alive, even as time and nature continue their quiet work. Maybe those hungry bacteria can take a break from their buffet, so that Titanic can rest in peace with many more years to come.
More than a century after the Titanic sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, scientists are still discovering new things inside the wreck. When researchers first located the ship in 1985, many believed it would remain relatively stable for hundreds of years. But recent deep-sea surveys show that the wreck is changing much faster than expected. Entire sections of the ship are weakening, steel structures are collapsing, and some of the most recognizable parts of the Titanic have already disappeared. But the ship itself is only part of the story. The ocean floor around the Titanic has become one of the most unusual underwater archaeological sites ever discovered. When the ship broke apart during the sinking in 1912, thousands of objects were scattered across the seabed as the bow and stern sections descended. Today, that debris field stretches across several square kilometers and contains more than 5,000 documented artifacts from the ship and its passengers. Over the past few decades, robotic submarines and deep-sea expeditions have recorded thousands of personal items that once belonged to people on board. Some of the most striking discoveries include luggage, jewelry, watches, shoes, and personal belongings that remained preserved in the cold, dark waters of the deep Atlantic. Leather suitcases have been found still closed, protecting clothing and documents inside. In several cases, even paper labels and fabric patterns were still visible after more than 100 years underwater. One particularly well-known artifact is a gold pocket watch recovered from a passenger. The watch had stopped at 2:28 in the morning, only minutes after the Titanic disappeared beneath the surface. Several similar watches have been found over the years, giving historians a clearer idea of the timeline during the ship's final moments. Jewelry has also been recovered from the wreck site. Expeditions have found diamond rings, gold necklaces, brooches, and other valuables that once belonged to first-class passengers. Some of these items were later matched to passenger records and family archives, allowing historians to identify the original owners. Researchers have also discovered sealed bottles among the wreckage. Several wine bottles recovered from the debris field were still intact after more than a century on the ocean floor. The corks remained sealed because of the enormous water pressure at that depth. Not all discoveries are glamorous, though. Scientists have also found everyday objects that give a more personal look at life aboard the Titanic. These include shaving kits, perfume bottles, eyeglasses, combs, shoes, and even unopened tins of food. In many places, the organic materials have decomposed, but the objects themselves remained in place on the seabed. One of the most haunting discoveries made during early expeditions involved pairs of shoes lying next to each other on the ocean floor. Researchers believe these shoes mark locations where passengers likely came to rest after the sinking. Over time, the bodies decomposed, leaving only the footwear behind. All of these artifacts help historians better understand what life was like aboard the ship during its final voyage. But while these objects remain scattered across the seabed, the wreck itself is slowly disappearing. To understand why, it helps to look at the extreme environment where the Titanic lies today. The wreck sits nearly 3,800 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic Ocean. At that depth, the pressure is more than 380 times higher than at sea level, and temperatures usually stay between 1 and 2 degrees Celsius. Sunlight never reaches the ocean floor, and the entire area is covered in permanent darkness. When scientists first discovered the wreck in 1985, the bow of the ship still looked surprisingly recognizable. Railings were still standing. Deck structures were visible. Some openings even allowed small submersibles to look inside parts of the ship. But later expeditions began to notice something unusual growing across the surface of the metal. Long rust formations were hanging from railings, portholes, and broken beams all across the wreck. At first glance, they looked like ordinary corrosion. But when scientists examined them closely, they realized these structures were actually created by living microorganisms. Researchers call these formations rusticles. Rusticles are produced by colonies of bacteria that survive by feeding on iron. The microbes attach themselves to the steel surfaces of the ship and slowly break down the metal. As they consume iron, they form long rust structures that grow outward from the wreck. Some rusticles can reach nearly 1 meter in length and hang from the ship like underwater stalactites. Despite their solid appearance, rusticles are extremely fragile. If touched by a robotic arm or submersible, they crumble instantly into reddish dust. That dust is essentially the remains of the ship itself. The bacteria convert solid steel into rust particles that eventually fall away and disperse across the seabed. Researchers estimate that microbial activity may remove hundreds of kilograms of metal from the wreck every year. Over time, this weakens the structural supports that once held entire sections of the ship together. As the metal becomes thinner and more brittle, parts of the wreck begin collapsing under their own weight. This process has already changed several well-known areas of the Titanic. Sections of the deck have fallen inward, railings have broken away, and parts of the interior have collapsed completely. One famous feature, the captain's bathtub in the officers' quarters, was clearly visible in earlier expeditions, but has since disappeared as the surrounding structure deteriorated. Rusticles are not the only force damaging the ship. Saltwater corrosion continues to attack exposed metal surfaces. Deep-sea currents move sediment across the wreck. Certain marine organisms slowly burrow into weakened materials. Even the enormous water pressure at that depth puts constant stress on structures that are already fragile. Because of all these factors, scientists now believe the Titanic is in an advanced stage of decay. Some researchers estimate that large portions of the visible structure could collapse within the next few decades. Eventually, the wreck may flatten into a low pile of rust and debris scattered across the ocean floor. Even as the ship slowly disappears, it continues to provide valuable scientific information. Modern expeditions now use high-resolution sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicles to document the wreck in incredible detail. These surveys allow researchers to track how the ship changes over time and preserve digital records of areas that may soon collapse. Detailed mapping of the debris field has also helped scientists understand how the Titanic actually broke apart during its sinking in 1912. Earlier theories suggested the ship split cleanly in two near the ocean surface. But modern surveys show the breakup was far more complex, with different sections of the hull failing at different stages as the ship descended. More than 110 years after the disaster, the Titanic remains one of the most studied shipwrecks in history. What scientists are learning from it goes far beyond the story of the sinking itself. The wreck has become an important laboratory for studying deep-sea microbes, corrosion, and how large metal structures break down in extreme environments. In a strange way, the Titanic is still changing and still teaching researchers new things. But the clock is ticking. The same microorganisms that are quietly consuming the ship today will eventually erase much of what remains. Over time, the massive ocean liner that once carried more than 2,200 passengers across the Atlantic may slowly disappear, leaving only scattered artifacts and scientific records of the wreck that once rested in the darkness of the deep ocean.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
The Titanic.
Titanic.
The Titanic.
Congratulations! You can now forget everything you've seen in the movies or everything you've read in books and newspapers and heard from people. Now we have the most detailed and reliable study of the famous sunken ship. A large-scale Titanic 3D scan allows us to see in fine detail everything that happened during the disaster. And rest assured, there was a lot going on there that you've never heard of. Are you ready for Titanic new discoveries? Let's go! There's a fat chance, or a thin chance, take your pick, that there are no people here who haven't heard of what happened. But just in case, here's the quick backstory. On April 10, 1912, the giant cruise ship Titanic sailed from Southampton, England to New York City. 4 days later, the ship collided with an iceberg and sank in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. It was one of the most tragic and biggest disasters in the history of sea voyages. Since then, the wreck of the giant ship has been lying under a layer of icy water. For decades, people wanted to get this ship from the bottom many times, but they never fully tried. Passenger stories, documentaries, and books have given us a complete picture of what happened. But the only witness that can tell us about those tragic events is the ship itself. And some people decided to ask it about that night. A group of experts, oceanographers and cinematographers, recreated a virtual version of the events and showed it in the documentary Titanic: The Digital Resurrection. This is the most detailed digital reconstruction of how the Titanic sank ever made. To create it, specialists from the Magellan Company sent marine robots to the bottom where the ship lies at a depth of 12,500 feet. In such a place, all objects experience immense water pressure. To better understand how great it is, imagine the weight of a heavy barbell on your fingertip. Experienced divers with standard scuba gear can only swim at depths up to 130 feet and a little deeper. So it's a challenging, almost impossible mission to descend to such a depth and conduct research. It's dangerous for people. That's why the team of specialists sent robots there. Equipped with cameras for deep-sea surveys, they took more than 700,000 photos and videos in 4K resolution. They were collecting data for 3 weeks, exploring every part of the ship. Eventually, they had about 16 terabytes of data. Now, 1 terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. Is that a lot? The largest game on PC, Microsoft Flight Simulator, weighs about ½ terabyte, and it has maps of the entire planet to create a realistic flight simulator. Still, this huge program weighs 32 times less than that Titanic scan. Imagine how detailed the model of the ship and the simulation of the disaster turned out to be. Moreover, the team combined all this information with the drawings of the ship. They calculated the speed of Titanic that night, its direction, its position, and the angle of impact with the iceberg. All of this was uploaded to supercomputers to create precise crash simulations. After that, specialists studied eyewitness reports, got consultations from historians and maritime experts, and then presented a detailed staging of the tragic night. Some things turned out to be different from what you know about them. For example, the iceberg didn't make a huge hole in the side of the ship. A Titanic wreckage scan shows that a piece of ice had struck a glancing blow and created several holes in the hull. Each of them was the size of an A4 sheet of paper. How could such minor damage destroy a giant ship? The problem was that those A4-sized punctures covered the entire length of the case. The Titanic's creators claimed that it was the most unsinkable ship in the world. However, its unsinkability lay in the fact that it could stay afloat even if 4 of its watertight compartments got flooded. But the collision with the iceberg led to the flooding of 6 of them. The iceberg had a mere 6.3 seconds of contact with the ship and still managed to sink it. The Titanic wreckage scan also showed a portal with a broken window. The iceberg probably crashed in there. This finding confirms the words of eyewitnesses that pieces of ice got into the cabins. Just imagine how frightening that was. You're sleeping peacefully in your bed, then you hear a loud crash, and a piece of iceberg falls into your cabin. And after that, absolute chaos begins. The researchers found out exactly how the ship had split in half. In the famous movie, we all saw how the back of the ship had risen above the water and then broken off. The ship indeed broke, but not as gently as we saw on the screen. Yeah, the scale of the disaster was terrible, but the reality was even worse. The ship wasn't just broken, it was torn in two. Wooden and metal parts of the ship, pipes, chunks of the hull, walls, everything was torn and bent. The first-class cabins were torn in two. Imagine the screeching of metal that sounded on that cold night. Researchers compared other Titanic facts versus the movie. One of them was a story about First Officer William Murdoch. In the movie, his character attacked passengers who were trying to board the boat. But in reality, everything happened differently. Titanic survivor Charles Lightoller said William Murdoch had drowned when he was trying to lower a lifeboat into the water. He didn't attack anybody, but still faced a tragic fate. There are no exact details, but high-resolution scans have confirmed this version. But one of the most impressive and heroic tales that happened on the Titanic occurred in the boiler room. With the help of robots, experts discovered that one of the boat's steam valves had been left open. This finding only confirms eyewitness stories that the engineers stayed in the boiler room for more than 2 hours after the collision with the icebergs. This group of brave people maintained a power supply until the very end. Why did they do it? Proper lighting on the Titanic helped people safely lower the boats onto the water. Electric power also made the Titanic visible to distant ships. Moreover, passengers reported that the Titanic's lights were on even when it was submerged underwater. The brave feat of the engineers helped save hundreds of passengers' lives. Who knows, perhaps further research of the ship will tell us more about other heroic actions of the passengers and crew members. actions that will be worth making a movie about. In addition to studying the ship, the researchers also scanned the seabed around the wreckage, where not only parts of the Titanic but also personal belongings of passengers, including gold coins, pocket watches, combs, shoes, and so on, were scattered. By the way, many of those items have been raised from the bottom and sold at various auctions. You can also see some artifacts from the ship in specialized museums. One of those is called Titanic Belfast and is located in Northern Ireland. It is open to the public. A digital replica of the ship not only shows us how the Titanic sank, but also literally saves the ship. The condition of the wreckage is getting worse every day. Gigantic pressure, cold temperature, water, and marine life, all of this is slowly destroying the vessel. Oh yeah, some companies that organize dive trips to the ship for tourists also pose a danger to the ship. It turns out that there are a lot of people who wanted to go down inside a submersible to the legendary wreck. As a result of some of these excursions, parts of the ship were damaged. Experts predict that within the next 40 years, the unlucky liner may disappear completely. Fortunately, the Titanic 3D scan has provided such a level of detail that you can imagine walking inside it. This means that the tragedy will never be forgotten. Of course, 10 videos like this one won't be enough to cover the full scope of the work that the filmmakers have done. Fortunately, the documentary, Titanic: The Digital Resurrection, is available for viewing. You can watch the movie and also study the 3D models of the ship. Who knows? Perhaps you can make new discoveries.